Hi, Abby here again. Welcome to part 2 of my series of seams. Last time we covered a variety of basic seams, so let's try some more complex ones. Today I will demonstrate a French seam, a double top stitch seam, a flat felled seam, a welt seam, a tucked seam, and a lapped seam. This set of seams are all reinforced, and some enclose the selvage within the seam. All of these seams add durability and finishing touches to your work. We're going to start with the French seam, so let's get going. Line up the fabrics with the wrong sides together. Sew a regular straight seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press the seam to one side, then press the fabric faces together. Sew a regular straight seam on the wrong side with a 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch seam allowance. This encloses the seam and prevents fraying inside. This seam is better used on lighter fabrics as it can add bulk. Line up the fabric with the faces together. Start with a regular straight seam using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Press the seam open on the back side of the fabric. With the fabric face up, sew a regular straight seam using the center of the first seam as a guide. Repeat on the other side. This will attach the selvage to the fabric while adding a decorative top stitch to your work. You can use a straight stitch, a zigzag, or even one of those fancy stitches on your machine. With the wrong sides of the fabric together, make a regular straight seam with double the seam allowance you want to end up with. I used 1 inch for this demonstration. Open the seam and trim one selvage to half its width. Fold the wider selvage over the thinner one and press. Fold both pieces over against the face of the fabric, encasing the selvage in itself, and press again. Sew a regular straight seam as close as possible to the folded edge. With the faces of the fabric together, sew a regular straight seam with 5/8 inch seam allowance. Trim one selvage to about half the width and use pinking shears on the other selvage to prevent fraying. Press the selvage to one side with the wider piece on top. With the fabric face up, sew a top stitch to secure the selvage. Use the first seam as a guide. Press back one seam allowance, 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch. Line up the pieces of fabric wrong side up, putting the selvages together. Baste a seam on the wrong side, closer to the folded fabric. I have found in my experience, working this on the back side is just easier. Flip the work over to the right side and sew a regular straight seam, securing the selvages together. Top stitch the folded side to the fabric if desired. Overlap the fabrics with the desired seam allowance. Pin into place or use tape or clips for fabrics like vinyl. Use a regular straight seam as close to the top edge as possible. Adjust the fabric or reposition the needle and sew another regular straight seam about 1/4 inch from the first seam. This seam is used for bulkier fabrics that don't fray, like fleece or vinyl. Well, thank you for watching part 2 of my seaming series. I hope you had fun, and if you learned something, even better. If you have any questions or anything to add, please do so in the comments below. We'll see you next time.